We're having a conversation with a very Reverend Canon Omollo. He is the Provost of the All Saints Cathedral in Nairobi. That's of the Anglican Church of Kenya. Good morning, Provost.
Good morning, Latif and
Janet and Mariam.
Janet and Mariam.
Karibu sana.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be on NTV today.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
We'll start the conversation, of course, just getting into it on where's the church. Can we hear the voice of the church? But before that, let's hear the voice of Janet with today's quote. She'll give us a quote, something that's been said by someone at some point in time. She'll tell us who, what, when, where, how.
Why, how.
And then we'll see whether we relate. Those words make sense today.
And whom. Yeah, because yesterday I was part of a climate conversation, and of course Wangari Maathai's name came up a bit. I think that's why I remembered her today. So in her memoir, Unbowed, which came out in 2006, she wrote, "You cannot enslave a mind that knows itself, that values itself, that understands itself." You can give us your reactions or your reflections on that.
You cannot enslave
a mind that knows itself, that values itself, that understands itself.
Absolutely. I think I definitely agree, because that speaks to self-awareness. A person who knows themselves, who knows their self-worth, who knows their rights, who knows what is due for them, what their rights or privileges, really cannot be manipulated, cannot be lied to, and I absolutely agree with the late hero, Wangari Maathai.
Right. And, you know, she was obviously an activist back in the 90s when there was another push to enslave minds. Seeing a very similar occurrence right now happening in the country. And even as we get into the conversation, just want to get your reflections on some of the tragic happenings over the last week or two.
Yeah, thank you. When you mentioned Wangari Maathai, Janet, All Saints Cathedral, where I serve as a provost, resonates very, very well with Wangari Maathai. Remember, during the Moi era, when Wangari Maathai stood against land grabs, including Uhuru Park, by the late President Moi, and pushed against destruction of a recreational center, and they were clobbered, they were beaten. They ran to All Saints Cathedral, and All Saints Cathedral offered them refuge at that time with the Reverend Timothy Njoya and all that. And so the mention of Wangari Maathai resonates with us, especially in this season of agitation for the rights of the people and all that. And back to the question, really, colleagues, as you see what's happened in this country over the last weeks and the terrible happenings of last year, it simply tells us that we have a regime that is presiding over a senseless killing of innocent people, and a regime that seems to thrive in chaos. And what we are seeing is typically cluelessness in terms of driving the country. And therefore, it pains a Kenyan like me to see innocent lives taken so senselessly with police officers who are mandated by the Police Service Act to protect people, to guard people. And so when you see what is captured even on the front page and what we see on television yesterday, it's deeply paining and hurting. And I don't know how much both our leaders and those placed in positions of issuing command feel for these people. Do they sense the anger boiling in the hearts of Kenyans? And that's my fear.
I want to get into the role of the church over time, but before I get into that, for someone who may not be familiar with the church, when you say Provost or Reverend Canon, walk us through that so that we have an understanding.
So basically, the Provost in Anglican, Catholic, or other ecclesiastical spaces that are similar is simply the senior pastor of a cathedral in layman's language. So the pastor in charge of a cathedral.
Right.
You'll have a vicar for an ordinary parish, but then you'll have a provost for the cathedral. Cathedral is a center of a diocese, for example.
Okay.
So basically that.
Okay. So, and All Saints Cathedral is the center for the Nairobi diocese?
For the All Saints Cathedral diocese, but also the national cathedral for the Anglican Church.
For the Anglican
so
Church.
it's ecclesiastically is the headquarters of the Anglican Church, where the seat of the Archbishop is, as it were.
All right. I think growing up, seeing the church speak out against, whether it was, President Moi, whether it was bad governance as a whole, whether it was torture chambers. It was a consistent thing, specifically the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church. There was just quite a lot of pushback. Over the years, though, that seems to have gotten diluted. I don't know when we sort of lost the plot. And I could, even church leaders, whether it's Reverend Timothy Njoya, Cardinal Njue, I'm trying to forget the name of Father Kaiser, who lost his life. Like, there's been a consistent push from the church as far as matters politics. But then after a while, we just kind of tapered off. When and why did that happen?
I think, Miriam, brilliant observation. When you look at the construct of politics in Kenya vis-a-vis religion or faith, as you may call it, you'll realize, as you rightly observed, that at some point then there existed what I would call a sort of a marriage between the two, where church leaders in particular would move a lot closer, create more closer proximity to power. And I think that, in my view, was a political calculation by politicians who knew that the church wields a significant level of influence in the society, and therefore bringing the church on our side as politicians then would create a space where we would have an easy influence over the populace. And you see, President Moi tried to do it very well, cut himself as a very good AIC Christian, carrying the Bible on Sundays, and our Sunday news begins with Mtukufu Rais leo alishiriki kanisa fulani, na utamwona, you'll see him in a Bible opening his pages, and you see that probably President Kibaki didn't do much of that. But then you come to President Uhuru and President Ruto now. They potentially followed into the footsteps of President Moi and tried as much as they can to bring the church on their side. And I'm afraid to say, with all respect, that many church leaders fell to the bait, because proximity to power can be good, can be sweet. There are appointments, there are brown envelopes, and there are protection and all sorts of things, and goodies being dished out. And there's a sense in which a section, and I want to underline that a section of the church moved closer, and I would say, again, potentially controversially, that went to bed with government, even endorsed certain presidential candidates. But that does not mean that the church in entirety swung that way. And again, I can chronicle for you the consistent voices of the church. The Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops has remained incredibly consistent. You mentioned Archbishop Muheria, among others, have remained incredibly consistent. Remember last year, they called out the government on a culture of lies that was building in the country. And you've seen the National Council of Churches of Kenya has fairly remained very consistent. And even away from those groupings, even at the Cathedral where I serve, we have remained very consistent. All Saints Cathedral, I can proudly say, is one of the very few churches in the city where politicians will not come and dance on the pulpit and spew hate and abuse at each other, because we have defined parameters as far as the relationship between religion and politics is concerned. So therefore, in a nutshell, the church on one side has compromised a great deal, endorsing government and going to bed with them. And regrettably today, as we speak, those are the very people who are again now speaking against the ills that this very godly, quote-unquote, government is undertaking. But then on the other hand, we have very consistent voices.
You know, Mariam, I think there's a divide among the Christian faithful, right? That then goes all the way into the structures of the church. So the mainstream traditional old churches, Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, the PCA, the AIC and all, who then went and formed the NCCK and, of course, the Council of Catholic Bishops, are what the Provost has just referred to, you know. They have been consistent, they have stayed within the structure, and, you know, they are measured. And then there are very many people who've moved out of these mainstream churches and gone into these other churches that mushroom and grow. They mushroom, they start small, and they grow and become huge churches. And this is where we've seen politicians moving into. And every Sunday, these are the ones that are hosting these politicians. Now, the question is that from the clergy as the leadership of the faith, do you speak the same language? Do you ever have a place where you meet as NCCK and then as the Evangelical Alliance and the others, where you have matters that are common?
Yeah, there are those broader groupings. And again, let me just clarify in case anyone wouldn't understand as much. So within the Christian side, you'll have the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops that brings together the huge community of the Roman Catholic Church here, which undisputably is the largest single denomination. And then you have the National Council of Churches of Kenya that brings together the Protestant churches, currently led by my colleague, the Reverend Canon Kenyan, who is the Secretary General. That's where you have the Methodists, the Anglicans, name them, PCAs and all that, and many others down there. Then thirdly, you have what we call the Evangelical Alliance. The Evangelical Alliance now brings in largely the Pentecostal wing, and you've seen that where we have our brothers Sitam and all across. So each of those groupings in their different distinct settings, they have meetings and they chart their way forwards. At the top level, then we'll have the Interreligious Council. So Interreligious Council then brings us together with our Muslim brothers and sisters.
And Hindus.
And the Hindus as well, and other religions as well. So it's all religions together. Unfortunately, sometimes it's difficult to chart common agenda, especially at the broader level. What brings us together is what is the greatest concern to the people of Kenya. And at that front, then, we are able to speak the same language. But unfortunately, when you have churches or denominations or church leaders who don't fall under those groupings, then they feel the freedom to go and do whatever they want. So the president will donate money to this particular church, and the church leaders will fairly unite and say, no, that's wrong. But then one who is unregulated with very weak governance systems and is on a spree of making money will say, wakikata, rais sisi tulete, sisi tulete. And as I said in my beginning statements, politicians are politicians. Yeah. They want to draw people. So if you are going this way, then these ones can come, then I'll go and bring this one this way. So you've seen a single 20 million Kenya shillings being donated to one church. And so that is the bait then that exists there. That's why from our end, we are pushing for internal self-regulation, where every single church must fall under an umbrella, and that umbrella then creates regulatory frameworks that can hold this, and allow me to say here, I know some may not be happy with this, but I'll have to say, these dubious outfits hold these dubious outfits accountable, so that wananyoroshwa in terms of governance.
Right. Have the dubious outfits said, have they been publicly and outrightly criticized by the church? Has there been a time that you've pushed back on, say, the false prophets that really take advantage of so many congregants?
We have spoken about that, not just me. Several people have spoken about that. Remember the Shakahola debacle and all these others. They've been called out several times. The fake miracle workers and all that. But of great interest to me is that we recently united, brought together by a group called Hesabika, seeking to create, Hesabika is a Kiswahili word for stand to be counted, brings us all together across the board, seeking to create governance systems for churches and what we call a code of conduct. So Hesabika has done an incredible job. We are part of it as the Anglican Church and as an NCCK, creating a code that then regulates the doing of church and holds every single person who calls themselves pastor responsible. So we're pushing that and see if through the Mungatana bill that can be revived, and we create what we call a Commission for Religious Affairs, where we can have internal self-regulation, not government regulated. For me, that's the dream that I have, that if you can move to that level, then just the same way SACCOs operate. So no matatu will be on the road if you're not under a SACCO. And if matatu X misbehaves, then we go for SACCO Y, under which they are. So if church X misbehaves, then you're under an umbrella. We then hold that umbrella accountable.
A line of accountability.
So that's really the thinking among most of us, the National Council of Churches of Kenya, KCCB, and even EAK, who are our very good brothers and sisters.
Why not? Because the internal regulation is up to you, and clearly you're working towards it. Why not also have some government oversight? I think there's definitely a need for it.
Obviously, I agree, Miriam, because that will not exclusively exclude government. What we are saying is that when you bring in government to regulate religion, then you'll get problems there. You'll get into a Rwanda situation. you'll get into other Islamic State situations. But if we distinguish these two, but then...
Just for context, what's the Rwanda situation?
Where, I may be going to Rwanda anytime, so I don't want to be picked, but where government literally controls and closes churches, creates thresholds for amount of money that you should be, your turnover, what level of education for clergy. If you don't meet all those, then all those churches are closed. So several of them were closed. And that is an operation by government, as it was. So Interior, for example, here, will go and knock on, Omollo, what is your qualification? Which university did you go to? How are you holding your books of accounts? Which is good, but I think is bad because then you're pushing a little too much. For us, we'll desire then a corridor is created within that self-regulatory framework where criminality can still be acted on. So you can push criminality if a church, for example, raises money, a pastor raises money from members to do X, but then they take all that money with their wife and go on a holiday somewhere. So you can invoke a criminal clause and then push that for justice at that level. So there will still definitely, in my opinion, be need for government involvement, but not to regulate, not to know who should run a church.
But I think there's a fairness in regulating, in clamping down, just to be able to, it forces accountability. I see what you're saying. You're saying not to a fault, but I do think there's something there in trying to understand the profile of the person who's leading service, try to understand their intentions.
Exactly. So
still
that
having a
so Janet,
regulated.
That is transferred to exactly what you're saying. So it will not sit with government. Our proposal, it sits with the regulator. So NCCK will make sure that their members fit within what is prescribed, and we work with government and say these are the bare minimums that we must have. So definitely, because you don't want a police, even if he's preaching there, then a police comes in and begins to arrest you. So like today,
I understand the excesses, and for sure I get it, because whenever government regulation has its its cons, we're all very much aware. But then also self-regulation, you still require oversight.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering then, like when people say like, okay, can we have churches, for example, have this threshold for someone to be a leader, whether it's in practice or in theology and education and training, whether it's like that, or let's have your books of accounts audited and see where the money go. I don't think that's such a terrible thing.
It's a mix of the two, right? It's just many of the industries in Kenya, even the media, we've pushed for self-regulation. And the Media Council of Kenya is such a body where now we are incorporating government into it, but the media practitioners are the ones who come up with code of conduct and training and capacity building for media and licensing. You get your media license every year as a practicing journalist. It's given by the Media Council, which is a quasi. Right? It has a lot of media input into it, the industry input, but then it's a creation that is recognized in law.
Exactly.
True.
By
but then there's
government.
also like the Communications Authority, which will just zima.
Which is the oversight. And,
yes.
and
so I think that's what we're thinking.
And its role here, the Communication Authority's role here is to look at the licensing of the media operation, but the practice
is within the
Media Council.
True.
Exactly. I think you've explained that.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Shall we take a break?
Yes.
And then we come back and continue the conversation? Because I'd like also to know this Mungatana bill, the report that was handed over to the president of the Shakahola on churches and all, how far it's gone, but also whether you people call out each other, like openly. Reverend Canon Omollo, what you said last Sunday, no, that's not the direction we take.
Yeah.
The very Reverend Canon Evans Omollo is the Provost of the All Saints Cathedral. He's our guest this morning. We're asking ourselves, where's the church, the voice of the church in everything that's happening politically in the country, and how can that be brought to bear to move the country forward positively? Back in a moment. Good morning.
Yeah, she's done it.
Script.
I love the last part about in not just in word but in action, because I think that's what's left a lot of people disenfranchised and jaded. There was also, how Mariam highlighted where the church has actually really come out strongly in the past. And I'm just wondering, beyond prayer and statements, which are crucial, prayer is also very powerful, there's other tangible things that I think the church can do. I know you've spoken to, trying to make sure that there's regulations, but I wonder now, in a time like this where protesters who are peaceful sometimes need refuge, or whether offering, part of the offering that comes into church, some of that can be budgeted to maybe help with people's legal fees or seeking justice for survivors of violence, you know, because that's a very tangible, powerful way that the church can support people beyond prayers and statements. Is that happening at all? Are there any plans to be a lot more intentional with tangible results?
So, Janet, I'm so glad that you've asked that. Let me start with, I'll give a few examples, maybe two. The Roman Catholic Church does the most incredible work in this country, in the region, and across the world in terms of social action, social justice, and social service. So in every single corner, you'll find sponsorship to children who are needy. You'll find them practically getting their hands dirty to do stuff, even creating financial services accessible to the people and all that. So really incredible. But let me zoom in back to All Saints where I serve. Last year, we were at the very heart of the Gen Z's protest. And you may remember, myself personally, alongside other colleagues, we came out, and as you talk about action and practical steps beyond words and statements, on that very fateful 25th, which is coming up for anniversary on Wednesday, we managed to hold back the police, and literally by our bare hands, and negotiated with them and told them, you can't be firing gunshots at protesters who are lining in front of All Saints. 3,000 young people have taken refuge within the church. You're throwing tear gases and shooting, real shooting. So in my black Canon Kazuka, I walked up and negotiated with them. They looked mad, ready to kill, with red eyes. Do you know, they mellowed and put their guns down, went back into the trucks that were parked there. And so that, in our view, prevented what would have been a bloodshed in front of a religious space. But beyond that, let me just even that as an example. We opened the church for 3,000 young people who took refuge there because of the massive traffic that was coming from Kibera along Gong Road, and those were coming from town being pushed, and they found refuge there. Beyond that, we worked with medical services, and we set up an emergency medical center at All Saints Cathedral, where those who were being shot and injured within town would be rushed in 2 minutes to All Saints, given first aid, then taken to KNH or Mbagathi and all that. So we mobilized in partnership with the young Kenyan doctors, which later was clamped down by the ministry, but they really, really helped us. In that space, we called our congregation to bring water, hot lunch, and other such supplies, sodas and all that. We were giving to protesters, and we were also giving to the aid workers. We registered over 100 volunteer health workers during that time. So as you talk about practical stuff, we held as well a memorial service on that very day. We raised money, which went into supporting families that were hurt. This Sunday, the 22nd, at 3 p.m., All Saints Cathedral is hosting an interdenominational service, purely church, where we will pray for the nation, we will pray for those who are injured, who lost their loved ones last year, but we'll also mobilize resources to support families that are affected at now. So that is the practical side that I'd want to bring.
Outside of the protests, what can the church do? What can the religious leaders do? You know, besides the statements and the prayers, what else can be done in this push? There's a push for better governance, push for accountability, push for better leadership in the country. What else do you think?
Perfect, Eric. And, you know, if you look at advocacy from the times of the Okulos and the Gitaris and the active times of Njoyas, and Muges and all that, a lot of that has been, I would call it, quote-unquote, confrontation. But people forget that there is another side to advocacy, which is accessing boardrooms and sitting in policy-making spaces to shape governance in this country. So one of the things, personally, I'm encouraging many of our religious leaders to do is to ensure that we recommend good Christian leaders to sit in those spaces where decisions are made to shape things for better. And I'm so glad that the Reverend Dr. Nelson Makanda chaired the IBC Commissioner's Selection Panel. And you'd expect a high level of integrity there. By the time you want to compromise a man of God, you've really tried. And that's what we are saying, that can we get into these spaces? We shape policy in education, we shape policy in immigration, we shape policy in all these spaces. And as it were, there are. And again, without sounding overly glorifying the Catholic Church, they are in that space. They are in that space, and they even have their commissions that present memoranda to different government entities, and they push. There must be a Catholic somewhere in every commission, in every policy-making body. So let the church mobilize, and let's present that alternative voice. And even as we talk about these budgets, you've had even the church really galvanizing itself and presenting very solid proposals on how those can be done. So,
Eric and Mariam, so we're hearing Canon talk about all of these, the allyship, etc. So is the gap that it's A, not enough, B, maybe not covered enough? Because I'm listening and saying, okay, this is what we need the church for. We need the church to quite literally open their doors, refuge, be in policy spaces, and then beyond protests, just walk with congregants and community. So where do you think the gap is? Yeah.
It's in the visibility for me.
Is it? Okay.
For me, it's in the visibility. Because yes, the advocacy, yes, you're doing all these things behind the scenes and accessing the boardrooms and doing this and the other, but then it needs to be threaded into what we can openly see and see that there's something that the church is guiding all of us towards, okay? When you talk about good governance and accountability, you call out everybody as citizens. You will call out your congregants, and those congregants will include those in leadership. Exactly. Right? So when you speak about good governance, I'd like to see visibly that this is what, for example, there was a meeting between the Interreligious Council with Parliament on matters A, B, C, D, where the Interreligious Council has participated in drafting laws, has participated in this and the other. There's a meeting between the Interreligious Council and the civil society. We had one called Ufungamano in the run-up to their constitution. Ufungamano brought together religious leaders and civil society in the clamor for a new constitution. When Yashpal Gai was picked to head the constitution review process, he said, I cannot go alone in this journey when there's been a parallel initiative led by the church and civil society. We're going to come together. And Yashpal Gai brought them together. So you see, with Fungamano, church had done something towards getting us to a new constitution.
Yeah.
Openly.
Okay.
So let Mariam tell us what she thinks.
Where the gap is. Okay, let me start with, there's what, like Erica said, there's what's happening. Like there's this clip of you, for example, speaking about DIG Lagat and Albert Ojwang's death. This is one side of it. Let's play that clip, Phil. Phil?
Even in the face of a regime that is increasingly acquiring dictatorial tendencies, whose agents and servants unleash terror on innocent young Kenyans whose only offense is a phone and data, and who goes on a spree to senselessly killing younger people to silence them from raising their voices. When the Holy Spirit is resident in us, the entire company of heaven is with us, and therefore we acquire unusual courage to speak and to demand good governance. Because speaking we must, because if we don't, then we are done. And life we must live only once. And dying, we must die only once. So before we die, being killed like cockroaches, the Holy Spirit and the company of heaven is resident in us and is propelling us with a conviction that we must speak. And that is why we want to ask this government to apologize to Kenyans for unleashing terror on young people, and those who hold positions that they misuse to kill Kenyans must relinquish those positions. Whether you are a deputy inspector of general police, you're not bigger than Kenya. We call on you to tender your resignation, allow for investigation to go on. And the Holy Spirit compels us to demand good governance because Kenyans are taxpayers.
Right. So that's one end of it. It's people like you speaking out against injustices, against the, you know, all the flouting of the law, and it happens quite often. But on the other hand, I assure you this weekend, President William Ruto will be in a church, guaranteed. He'll be giving money, he'll be not preaching, but speaking to the congregation, or at a funeral somewhere that will be led by a pastor, by a reverend, by someone in the clergy or in the church in one way or another. And it's a sanitization almost, and a rubber stamping of this administration that has gone on. When the National Prayer Breakfast was happening, I remember our comments just being like, what's happening? Those prayers are not for us. Those are not for us. And the American pastor who spoke very well and asked President Ruto to apologize, and he gave the most half-hearted apology I've ever seen. If you know, it's like, what is happening? So there's a rubber stamping of the regime by the church. But it's not, like you said, it's not all members of every church. It's specific factions. But now the thing is, telling who is who becomes a whole problem. And again, a majority of Kenyans still do worship within those churches that are rubber stamping politicians, that are receiving 20 million shilling donations, that are, you know, excusing a lot of the things that we do see. So now that's the problem. That I think that's where the connection is lost. And especially with young people, it's just harder and harder to reconcile. Because it's like, okay, you tell me this, this is what you preach, but then the people that you fraternize with are drinking wine, and you're telling me to drink water. Yeah.
It's like those voices supersede the sober, measured voices, almost. Yeah.
I really don't know what to say, but I think, goes back for me to what I said earlier, that you know, like even in a family, you'll have your children, you'll have your 13 children or 6 or 4 or 2, like the women of today. But there will be one child which will always be wayward, sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And therefore, one little maize we were taught growing up does not spoil the flavor of githeri. And therefore, there is a good side. It will be important that we focus on the good side. But I guess it's also good to note that those sides that are misrepresenting the church must be called out. And for me, I pity believers who go into sanctuaries or places of worship, whether it's a mosque, whether it's a temple, whether it's a church, and sometimes don't have a critical mind. You know, religion is not just about emotions. Religion involves the capacity to think and process things and say, if I'm being lied to here, if I'm being taken for a ride here, you've seen pastors slap people, abuse them. But every now and again they go and go. So you don't suspend your thinking. You go into the sanctuary with your brain intact. But the problem is that in many religious spaces, we think that religion is emotions, feelings, and all that. And I want to ask Kenyans, please give feedback, be critical. The church that we lead here is an elite city church, and you can't do dodgy stuff and begin to confuse people. They'll ask you questions. They hold me accountable. They push me to the wall. And therefore, I want to ask believers, wherever you are, Kenyans, don't be duped. Don't be fooled. If you belong to a church where the pastor raises money, puts in the boot of their car and goes to count with their wife in the bedroom, you'd better speak out and look for a credible church with solid governance systems. Otherwise, you're the people who are creating a bad image for the church, which is unwelcome at this point in time.
Okay.
Respond to that issue of what else the church can do institutionally.
I remember you had asked, why are we not seeing all this? I think sometimes, before I come to that, and you may clarify a little, we are also not seeing most of these things because you guys as media are trained to largely report bad things. And where there is a crisis or where there is controversy and all that. So when good things are happening, the media coverage is given very little time. And I would want to ask the media, let's cover the good side of what the church is doing. If Evans calls for a press conference to say we are doing 1, 2, 3 with Ministry of Labor, supporting Ministry of Labor in sending young Kenyans to work in Italy, like we just sent one of our young people with this bilateral. By the way, like Eric, I just posed there, you know, sometimes people think we're only criticizing government every now and again. When good things are happening, we say. The other day I said, SHA is working. My members are telling me SHA has really helped them. And SHA is working for them. And I said that on television. On Sunday, one of my young members of our church is a beneficiary of the BLA program, flew to Rome, and I prayed with him as he was going. So there's something good happening on the side of government. So we highlight those ones. So I would wish that we pick up positive stories of what's happening. And even this Sunday, I'm already inviting you to come and see the prayers that we are seeing. Cover it. Don't just wait to cover people being killed out there. Cover the prayers that the church is offering for the country, the call for fellow Christians, and the call for government. And I think, Eric, that is a part that probably we are missing in our media enterprise. But you had asked something which I think you might just clarify.
So, in the push for multipartyism and in the push for a new constitution, we saw the church coming out and even supporting the civil society, ufungamano. In the new clamor now for better governance and all, what can the church do, you know, so in addition to criticizing, in addition to the boardroom conversations, how can you support the various young groupings of young people that are seeking direction, that are seeking, you know, a structure of how to engage? How can the church come in and help them become leaders that can emerge as leaders?
Perfect. So maybe I just pop out two things. One is in terms of mentorship, but the other one in terms of creating local communities where we can hold our leaders accountable. Let me start with the latter. You know, in this country, in the construct of our politics is constructed that, quote unquote, we worship politicians. And when politicians dish out bursaries, which are taxpayers' monies, then we think this is a good guy, yet he's giving you back the money that is from you as a taxpayer. And so I would wish that as church, and expand it as religious leaders, it is within us to organize communities into what I call people's assemblies. Create little people's assemblies in different villages, in different neighborhoods like ours, in different congregations, people's assemblies, where we can audit leaders who are elected. For example, my good friend and senator of Nairobi, doing an amazing job. We hold him accountable. We say, Senator, this is your mandate as far as the people of Nairobi is concerned. As a People's Assembly, we are asking you X. My good friend, Governor Johnson Sakaja, who again has supported us at All Saints Cathedral, a great deal with parking at Uhuru Park and all that. We audit what the governor is doing as a People's Assembly and then hold him accountable and say, Governor, you promised this, you've done this, but there are these gaps. And so I think the religious leaders have a huge responsibility of creating those conversations across the board, all the way to Mandera, all the way to Budalangi, all the way to Oloitoktok and Bondo. But second,
give it up, maybe a practical example. Yesterday, some of these goons you can see on the front page of the Daily Nation were very cozy around City Hall, and some of them are captured on video saying Sakaja to Melinda Gigi. How do you, for example, react to that?
Yeah, those would potentially be alleged connections to somebody issuing command. My reaction to that is that the worst thing that should ever happen in this country is people elected to serve the people swinging on a side to create chaos. It is not confirmed whether it was Governor Sakaja, but across the board, everywhere, it is very wrong for a politician or a leader for that matter to mobilize people to harm, to hurt. I think that role exclusively rests with the police. Set out police and create systems where police can do the policing. And probably, I don't know, you're pushing me to talk about this because I really wanted to talk about this. Because you look at even what happened here. You have peaceful protesters, and we must call them peaceful protesters, unless somebody zooms in and says this is a protester who was being chaotic. And then you have another group, very well organized, then springs up. Latif and Janet and Mariam, it is so shameful to see police walking alongside such people and then giving them cover as they rain mayhem on people. It is not in anyone's place to organize goons to cause mayhem in this city, because this city belongs to all of us and all that. So let me go to the second one, then I come back. The second one is mentorship. You have a lot of young people, the Ojuangs who are still alive, who desire leadership, people who can be mentored and raised to lead. I think the church, with the support of civil society and corporate organizations, can create what I think the West does much better, leadership academies, where such young people can be mentored and raised. You've seen people like Kassim Olaure coming up as potential leaders, but then others would want to take advantage of them and direct them into a different way. One thing I said on JM's 50th anniversary was that it is so sad that in this country, 50 years on, you still snoop on JM's family. Instead of government doing what is done in the West, like when JF Kennedy, you have JF Kennedy Academy, you have Nelson Mandela and all that. Why don't we have JM Kariuki Academy that is mentoring political leaders and raising them? So the church can come together, identify potential good leaders who espouse values that they desire, and then propel these ones into a space of leadership to influence good governance that we desire. So really, I propose those two for now.
We have like a minute, but I just wanted to get a quick reaction as to how the church is also addressing critical social issues like femicide, and how it's providing counsel, culture shifting. What role have you played? What statements have you made? And what sort of like tangible steps are you taking towards that?
Yeah. In terms of statements, those ones come sporadically, and I think even at the very height of many of those femicides, you remember the Monica Kimanis and all that, we issued statements, but unfortunately, as Latif said earlier, they never get propelled as much. But in terms of practical action, as organized congregations, probably that has not happened as much, but I know little groupings which are Christian-led are doing an incredible job in creating spaces where girls who are in danger find refuge. There's a friend of mine who is running an amazing program in Kibera, who is rescuing such kind of girls. I know of people who are offering counseling to such kind of people. But I guess we can do better and do more and propel that a lot higher.
And counsel the congregants, because it's also about shifting norms of what is considered socially acceptable, but it's harmful to a certain section. But yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Totally agree, Janet.
Okay.
We ended there. Asante sana for joining us today, Provost. So again, Sunday, what time is the service?
Sunday at 3 o'clock. Sunday at 3 o'clock at All Saints Cathedral. It's a religious leader service. We've mobilized churches across the city, and it's not political. So it's purely for prayers, remembering those who were killed last year, and asking church leaders what's our responsibility even as 25th comes.
The very Reverend Canon Evans Omollo is the Provost of the All Saints Cathedral. He's been our guest. In the next hour, we speak to Wafula Buke. He is one of those people who were detained in the 80s and 90s, was tortured at the Nyao torture chambers and all, and we want to hear his experience then, and as he reflects today, are there similarities to what's happening now? Coming up next, good morning, it's coming up to 8 a.m.